I think it's important to understand the fundamental shift that's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. And it's not super hard to see what the trajectory could look like. All we have to do is see how financial services have evolved over the last 10 years or even 20 years from a very manual process, heavy intermediary process, into a point where there are almost no intermediaries in financial services. So we're going to go through that process in real estate on its own. And the ability to automate a lot of the processes that intermediaries are doing is a lot easier today with some of the tools that are out there. And the ability of the investors to use their internal data to make better decisions compared to their peers who don't is meaningful, right? We're talking about, early innings. And in early innings, first movers have a massive advantage. So not only does it there a first mover advantage, if you're the last mover, you're going to die. There's no question here. So I don't know that I can tell them which tools to necessarily have to use right now, but I can tell you that if they're not paying attention, if they're not trying to figure out what is the world going to look like in the next 5 years, you're already behind the curve and you should be very scared.
Hi, Adam Gower here, founder of GowerCrowd.com and host of the Easy Win AI Real Estate Show on YouTube and good podcasts everywhere. My guest today is LD Salmanson, who is one of the co-founders of a company called Cherre, CHERRE.com. What Cherre do, I'm going to super oversimplify this, is they consolidate massive amounts of data from not only third-party sources, but also from companies' internal processes, and put them into a format that allow very large institutions, real estate institutions and investors to do some incredible magic tricks with the data to answer questions that would otherwise take an enormous amount of time to answer and be rife with errors. He's a fascinating fellow, and he very kindly, I actually, he's one of the few people I chatted to before the podcast, right, at a separate time. And he very kindly agreed to speak in language that mortals can understand. When he really gets at it, he is extremely detailed and very technical, and it is absolutely fascinating, but almost completely unintelligible to me anyway. But I did ask him to dive into that a little bit. So you're going to get a treat as well as he describes some of the technical aspects of what they do in order to deliver these incredible results to real estate institutions. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to our newsletter at easywin.ai. It accompanies this podcast and YouTube series and kind of fills a lot of the gaps on how to get some easy wins in AI. Okay, let's move on to LD Salmanson at Cherre. Here he is. LD, it's good to see you again. Thanks for joining me. I know you've got a flight, so let's get rolling right away. So I'm going to start with this, Cherre. So I would like to know what exactly is the value prop of Cherre. But before we even get there, what was the original vision behind starting the company, and how has that vision evolved over time?
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Surprisingly enough, our vision really hasn't changed over the years. And I think it's a sign of two things. One is we're still very excited about what we're doing. And two, that we probably had a good vision to start with on the way. We come from a background, most of the founders from financial services and building and selling companies in kind of highly data-rich environments. And clearly, real estate is one of those areas where obviously the largest asset class in the world from a dollar standpoint, extremely sophisticated players on both sides, but a very fragmented environment. And our vision was to bring to the real estate industry the same things that we've seen in the financial services industry, right? And our actual vision is to transform real estate investing and management into a science, right? To the extent that investing is a science. And that's what led to starting Cherre. And our mission is very clear: to help our clients connect all real estate data to a single source of truth and enable them to make better investment management decisions. And what that means is we literally help them connect all third-party data. That means market data or information about other assets that they have, anything that they can buy from that market or collect from kind of the general world. It also means connecting all of their internal information, right? Things that come from applications or other data sets they have access to within the organization, And then also what we call second-party data, which is data that we don't directly have within our applications. We don't really have in third-party data vendors, but maybe we get that through maybe property managers or JVs or other types of files that tend to come on a regular basis. And we help our clients connect all of that data to a single source of truth in a repeatable, reliable, consistent, accurate manner, then allow that data then flow through to anything they want, specifically to help them make either better investment decisions, so understanding markets, submarkets, opportunities, portfolios from both the market data and all their internal data. So hopefully they can answer not just, is this an interesting asset? This is an interesting asset for me, right? Am I going to outperform my peers? Do we typically do good with these types of assets, or are really bad at it, and probably we should avoid that? And then the other side of the house is asset management, right? What do I own? Where, and the word asset management is a very big word here, but generally, what do I own? Where do I own it? How is it performing versus budget, underwriting, peers? At every level, right? At the top of the fund, through the investment portfolio, down to the actual asset, and maybe the people around that. So that's generally our value proposition. And we mostly work with very large asset managers, banks, and insurance companies, very, very well-known clients. That's mostly in the core real estate space, but also debt and insurance around that. We manage a little over 3 trillion of AUM right now on the platform, so a pretty large number.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
3 trillion. That's extraordinary. So
well,
that
it's
actually
easy when these clients are really big, right?
That's a big number. That does actually in part answer my next question, which was, who is your user avatar? All right. So let's start there, because the first time you and I chatted, we did talk about that, and we also talked about, what I describe as being we mortals.
Yeah.
For whom the word trillion, it's like, I'm not sure how many zeros that is, but who are into the billions at the very high end. When will it filter down to us? So who is your user avatar? And can you give us like an example of a use case, like something that they might actually do with Cherre? By the way, Cherre, CHERRE.com. How might they actually use it on a practical basis?
So maybe you didn't ask this question, but I'll answer it before, and then I'll answer the question, which is
Sure.
Maybe a statement. I think that we technology providers in the real estate industry often get in love with how we do things and not in love with what the outcome is. The reality is, to a practitioner, I don't care how you do something, right? As far as I'm concerned, it'd be magic. I just don't care. So long as it works and adds value, I get excited. If I don't believe you, of course, it doesn't matter. But if you can demonstrate value, I don't really care. It might be exciting to me to learn how you do it, but I don't really care, so long as the value's there. So when I think about that avatar, what we typically call in the product world a persona, right? I think about, where do we add value to those folks and what outcome can we drive? And folks use Cherre at a very different level. So at the core, maybe underwriting is a very, very common use case. And again, I don't really care if it's underwriting of equity or debt and insurance. I mean, there are little different angles, but essentially what I'm trying to answer is something about the property itself, right? The physical asset, or property is a big word there, something about the people around it or in it or ownership around it. And I'm either trying to assess risk, maybe insurance, I'm under, risk of it, the building, something happened to it physically, or debt, the likelihood of me not being able to cover, the debt coverage or the payments, et cetera. Or equity, is there a likelihood this thing will either increase in value or keep value, depending from an NOI or ROI play. And we play across all of those, right? So within the insurance and banking environments, it's mostly around automated underwriting. How can I take the process of some type of thing came through the funnel and get to the point of deciding, do I want to underwrite this, yes or no, as fast as humanly possible? And it's sort of formulaic. I mean, there's some edge cases, but it should be fairly formulaic if those firms do good jobs. And a lot of our clients are really, really good at that. And then the other side of the house, or same side of the house, on the investment side, is the equity folks. And there I'm trying to answer two things. One is, I want to act faster than my peers. Speed has an element here. But second, as I mentioned at the beginning, I really want to say what we do different than other folks. So those are the type of things we spend a lot of time on. I'll give you an example of the kind of things you can do with Cherre that you really can't do with anything else, except with a lot of manual work. A great example is COVID, right? So COVID hits, and all of our clients, every large client wants to know, what is my exposure to lawyers or consulting firms or some of the small startups, right? Because I want to know what's about to disappear, right? Because I know some of the firms might stay for a long period of time. These are the folks most susceptible to leave. That's a really hard thing to solve, right? Because a large asset manager, take like a Starwood or a Brookfield, I have so many entities, I don't even know what they are half the time, and I have to send an analyst to go every one by one and try and figure out what the rent rolls in each one and who these folks are. It's basically impossible to do accurately. Cherre, it's a 2-second query. I just tell me all the tenants that I have, and I don't mind it across funds and doesn't matter because the data is connected behind the scenes, and just filter it by those who happen to be that asset class. 2 seconds question. Another great one is if you're looking, for example, of kind of unique type of plays, right? It's very easy to find another office building. They're all on the market, right? In one way or another. But a great example is, what if I'm looking to build multifamily, and let's say that 80 to 120 AMI, right? And under 80, usually there's some kind of government program, and those things don't really pencil very well. It's a really, really hard asset. It's actually a very attractive asset class for those who know how to do it right, but it's really hard to get right. And then above 120, 140, typically, again, depending on the markets, you can kind of have the market pencil in one way or another, depending on, interest rates and local pricing. But in that middle, it's just impossible, right? And one of our clients had a really great strategy, which is, what if we find universities and hospitals, other types of, quasi-institutional or quasi, public service type of institutions, which have space unused, and in their philosophy, they're looking for, some type of, helping the environment around me. And when I mean environment, I mean the people environment around me. And if I can find those assets or those spaces, maybe they'd partner with me such that we can build without having to buy the asset. We can share some of the upside on the back end. But in order to answer that, first I have to see which assets are owned by these folks. Really, really hard thing to answer. Ownership is a hard thing to unmask. Then I have to see, do they have these types of things in their charter? That's a pretty hard thing to answer because I have to go and process all these charters and answer these questions. And then I have to say, well, does this actual parcel meet my criteria? Is it in a good school zone, right, for me to build, the type of things I want? Is it close to the type of demographic or sociographic type of target? Is it far or close to certain intersections that matter to me? That's a really, really hard thing to do. And again, 2-second query in Cherre. Not only do I get the list of the assets to meet that criteria, we can rank them based on ones which are most likely for you to be able to transact on, and ones most likely for you to succeed, right? So these are the type of things you can do with Cherre.
It makes me laugh because it sounds so fantastic, right? Fantastic, like as in the word fantasy.
Yeah.
Large real estate company. I mean, it's like the ultimate kind of solution. All right, so let me ask. So let's just jump back a little bit. The tenant analysis challenge that you can do with one query. How is that done today? Actually, how do companies do it? What is the pain point that you're solving there exactly? Like, what does it look like, inside a company?
For a data problem, so I would say the vast majority of our clients are not, it's not that they're not sophisticated, it's not the top priority right now, but I'll answer your question as well. Mostly they're focused today on, how do I automate the process of collecting all the information about my assets and reporting on them in a timely manner? Because the minute I solve that, again, we're talking about very large institutions, we don't really spend time with smaller institutions. Once I solve that problem, all the people that were involved in collecting that data manually and putting it in, which besides the fact they make a lot of mistakes, it's very slow. It's not something that makes sense. It doesn't scale, especially with the assets company. You just have to throw bodies at it. So if I can solve that problem, if the bodies are not great, I can get rid of them. If they're good, I can now refocus them on, why are certain assets more successful or not? Let's find what we can do, and let's go dive into these assets and see how we can improve them. So first of all, I think about it in that context. The only way to do really large analysis is throwing bodies and doing it one by one. You can hire consulting for it, but there's really no way around it, because I don't have a single place where all of my portfolios and funds, unless I'm a small firm, right? I don't have that in one place. So I have no way of answering that question. So I have to go through every single investment vehicle I have. It could be a JV, which could be 1,000 of those, right? It could be portfolios that I own and operate internally. It might be a little easier. But even then, if I know all my assets, how do I know what leases are? I have to go to 3 different places. I have to go to maybe my like a Yardi, MRI, Real Page to get to the ones that are actually processed. And that might be 50 of those, 10 MRIs, who knows, right? Some will have to collect from property managers. I'm getting rent rolls submitted to me on a weekly, monthly basis, so that's not really easy. Some of these things are going to sit in, a VTS or some other type of system where the leases are being stored. So I have to go one by one, all of these, which is usually impossible from a time standpoint. And then I have to analyze all the information, find out who the owners are, and then I have to kind of figure out what type of people are on the other side of this. And that's a really, really hard question to ask. It takes months, literally, or weeks, right. And that's the only question I have. I don't have 1,000 questions as an asset manager, right?
So it's interesting you should talk about throwing bodies at the problem. It's actually something that I spoke to John D'Angelo, who is I think he's very senior at Deloitte. He talks to a lot of the the fund managers, some of these, major institutions. And that's exactly the comment that he made when I spoke to him. By the way, you nodded knowingly when I mentioned his name, but if you've not met him yet, you should let me make the introduction, because I think you guys would have a lot to talk about. So I'd be happy to set that up afterwards. Now, okay, so I think of you as, I told you before we even started, a rocket scientist, and I asked you to downshift on technical stuff, but I would like to see you doing a little sprint to mix my metaphors. And I'm going to ask you this from a technical perspective, all right? How does this work? All right, how do you how does it work, and what is the role of AI? Just give me a quick sprint just to understand what it does look like under the hood briefly.
I'll come to AI afterwards. I think it's a loaded term that I think we need to kind of dissect a bit.
Okay.
Essentially, there are three parts of the Cherre business. One is data has to come out of places. And the second is data has to go into some kind of centralized source of truth where it's all connected. And the third, it has to go out to something that's usable to a business user, because I've made this analogy before. Data is sand, it's not oil. When you pull it out of the ground, it's worth nothing. And on the contrary, it's a lot like sand. It's annoying, it's dirty, I have to deal with it. Nobody likes sand, right? Glass is pretty cool, but there's a lot of sand, very little glass, right? So I have to turn that into insight. So in those three components, pulling data out is very, very hard. So there's kind of three different realms of that. One is that third-party data. We've partnered with pretty much every data vendor known to man. And a lot of those folks before Cherre didn't sell data. You go to their application, you download a few rows in Excel, but if you wanted all the data, they didn't really offer that. Some did, obviously. So part of that was building those relationships with all those data vendors, which are all partners of ours, and having that data pre-connected behind the scenes in Cherre so I could turn that on and off for clients as fast as possible. The second realm is applications, right? And now it's getting a little better. A lot of these folks have APIs and different ways of getting data out to some of the data warehouses. Of course, it still needs to be connected downstream, but it helps a little to get the data out. But a lot of those firms still have really, really uncomfortable and clunky ways to get data out, especially if I want it, in real time or something close to real time. So we have to build connectors into those types of applications to be able to enable that for our clients. And the third realm is everything else. There's a file that might be one-off. It might be on a weekly basis. How do I have a situation where that file, I don't really know ahead of time, can I throw that into my universe, have it mapped to my data world pretty quickly, hopefully automatically, completely, and have that data connect to my entire universe? So that could be things like rent rolls or trial balance submissions from property managers. It could be ESG. It could be a lot of different things. Football traffic, right, from retail or things or sales data, try and calculate breakpoints. The second part is how that data connects to each other, right? So I said in the beginning, it needs to be, consistent, reliable, accurate, timely. That's really hard to do, right? So before I even connect the data, so being able to look at that data, did it come in the way we expected? Did certain data drop along the way? Are certain things out of range? Did it pass all the rules that we would expect to do with data? That's a whole universe on its own. Then I have to get this data to connect to each other, right? It doesn't connect naturally. You have 2 different parcel IDs, 17 building IDs, 100 addresses. How do I make these things connect? And that's a series of what we call entity resolution engines, things that allow different types of part to connect to each other. Oh, I know this parcel and this building connected. So these are 2 entities, and I've been able to make sense that these things are the same one. And we use a lot of data science there, things like knowledge graphs, which means taking all the data and mapping it into these kind of nodes and lines between them that are very rich at trying to understand relationships. We spend machine learning and filling in blanks, right? I know the floor above, I know the floor below. What's the most likely situation in between, right? Those things are very much kind of in that world of data science. And then I have to get that data out, right? So we have connectors going out into all the common platforms you expect. Some of the same platforms they came in from, right? ERPs and data, model systems. But often it's some of the more standard tools, right? Snowflake and Google and Microsoft, right? The standard kind of environments, or standard BI tools, business intelligence tools like Power BI by Microsoft, or Click and Tableau, all those things that create great dashboards. And again, that's a very interesting process of creating connectors that are repeatable to all those worlds. We use machine learning and what people typically call AI across every part of that. When it comes to processing data on the intake, analyzing that data for anomalies or discrepancies, connecting that data to each other in a programmatic way, and then making that data turn into insights on the back. AI to me is a very loaded term, right? Most of what we do in the realm of data science is statistics. It's not a bad thing. Most of what we do in statistics is hundreds of years old. And that's good. There's a lot of practitioners who understand that, well, I don't have to figure out what is a regression or multi-regression or multivariate regression model. These are fairly simple things to understand. It's the data has to be structured in a way that works. But if it is, we can just apply a lot of basic tools that we just already have in our quiver. When we think about AI, we often think about how do we take a regression model and then layer that into something that tends to be autoregressive. So it starts with something, but it kind of learns over time. That's the auto part, meaning it's going to auto do these things over time. I'm oversimplifying, of course. We've moved today in what we call LLMs, which are not just autoregressive models, they're autoregressive models with attention. And attention is a very interesting word, but it's actually very, very simple when you think about it. Language tends to function like a tree. After every word, there's a finite number of words that can come after them. So if I say I, take every single word in the dictionary minus I, those are the next options that could happen. And now I can play out these trees indefinitely, and I'm going to get a finite list at the end, right? And some of these things will create sentences, and some of these things will create words. Some of these things will create absolutely nothing, right? And what attention does is says, which branches should we focus a little more on? And we train things to be able to do that. And LLMs, which are fairly novel, based on Google's paper about transformers, which is called All You Need Is Attention, ironically. But it's actually a really good idea. So it took models like Bert and Roberta, which doesn't matter what they are, but these are basically languages that translated text or sentiment into sentiment or trying to understand what they are. And they can both create it, encode, and they can decipher, decode. LLMs function single directional, right? So I'm looking at that tree, and I'm going to try and find the most likely thing after that. So I'm interpreting your question. That creates a branch to the end. And I'm trying to answer that question, the most likely branch that is going to fit that. Of course, it's based on training data that we have, which is often what the open web or what's typically called. It's a really interesting tool because it allows us to communicate in a natural way. It doesn't reason, though. Definitely not yet. So I can ask it a question, they can pair it back common answers, which is great. I can go a little back and forth and try and tweet, hey, are there more ideas or things I haven't thought about? How do you feel about this idea that I have? But it's still pulling from things that already exist to a certain degree. It's not yet saying, hey, let me rethink the way that problem exists. And here's some ideas that are novel. We're not there quite yet, but I don't think it's very far away. So that kind of maybe that next step there.
And so the way that a user will interact with the data that you consolidate into one coherent silo, for want of a better attempt to describe what you do, how do they do that? Is it like in a communicative way, like people have become used to with LLMs?
No, although we'll probably roll something out at some point. I would say the vast majority of our clients interact with the data in one of two manners. And the ones that do the second also almost always do the first. And the first is to the technical team. These are firms that already have big, engineering, data science, analyst research teams. And all they want us to do is help them get all that data consistently into a single source of truth. They already know what they want to do with it. They have a series of dashboards. They have a series of machine learning models that they're running to rank markets and properties and all these things in real time, risk assessment, things of that nature. That's one way. And the other type of interaction is through our interface, right? Which is either what we call search. So think of, layers of data that I can turn on and off based on the data I have. So, I can turn on foot traffic, or I can turn on school zones, right? All those things that I might be interested in looking at a layer standpoint. And then I have kind of search filters, right? Where I can say, if I have, let's say, some of our big partners like RCA or TREP or REIS, then these filters are now available. I can search what debt's outstanding in TREP, or I can search some property characteristics from REIS. There are going to be leases from Comstock. Right? These are the type of things that I can do really, really well. And again, in a connected manner. And that gives me information about the asset from all my, again, internal and external information connected to everything. So that's one way of interacting. And asset management is very much a dashboarding kind of environment. Here's all the information I need to know. Part of it's, regular cadence, part of it's interesting. Then here are things that matter to me as a practitioner. So let's say I'm in the leasing department. So I want to see critical dates. I want to see everything that's coming up. I want to see performance. I want to see anomalies. But what if I could tell you something like, and do this for our clients, not only is this lease expiring, maybe January next year, here are all the other leases from Comstock in the area that might be able to fit that are also expiring in January. So how about you start calling some of these folks they're the most likely to fit this type of, and again, you're still doing your other work and stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that I can do. I have a lot of issues with these chatbots, not because they're bad ideas, but because very often they fail at the places that we care the most. You know this well. We're in an industry that has zero tolerance for errors. And any bot I put on it's going to have a greater than zero. I don't know how much, but it's greater than zero.
Right.
And I call this the equity in Dallas problem, right? So one of our clients asked to demonstrate one of these, and I thought this was a really great to tell him the point. So he asked a very simple question, what's the performance of my multifamily assets in Dallas the last 3 years compared to the market? Very simple question, right? And then the LM goes, well, what's Dallas? Right? Very first question, because do you mean the REIS market or submarket? Do you mean an MSA? And how do you define MSAs? There's no official definition of an MSA, right? So all very first question, the very first word, I don't know how to define. This is what do you mean by multifamily, right? Are we 2 to 4 count, 4 up? Do you want to have mixed use, right? I don't know what multifamily means in your world. And then do I want only the ones that you own 100%, or do you want all the JVs? Do you want me to separate your piece from the rest of the JV? Do you want debt as well? And then, of course, the client says, well, I get it. It's not going to work for what we need to do. We'll eventually get there, right? Because if we can start training the models over time on what is a multifamily for most of these types of practitioners, and what do you mean by Dallas, right? So I think we can improve this over time, but we also have to accept that different clients are going to have different definitions. So me telling you this is Dallas doesn't help, because another client will say, I have a different definition of Dallas and I want mine to work in that pot. So we have to not just enable the quick answers, we have to enable quick answers based on your data and your definition. That's a lot harder problem to solve. It's also the case that the visuals that are generated from these tools are still not at the level of quality and complexity that we'd want to put in front of a client. Sure, I can draw a black and white little chart, and it's not very exciting. It's not interactive. It doesn't give me the tools to analyze that. So we want to be very thoughtful. We don't really need to be part of the hype curve. This is what we do at our core. So we want to be very thoughtful and make sure that whatever we launch in the market is valuable to the personas we talked about and adds value to them, and that it doesn't, put us in a situation where it's kind of a joke.
I love some of the terminology that you use, LD, and it did from our first conversation as well. You don't want to be at the top of your hype curve. I love that idea, but not getting quite as high up as that. I would still like to ask you. So I've got 3 final sign-off questions. We'll keep this to half an hour if possible. But before I get to those, and I am going to ask you to move maybe a little bit up on that curve by asking, can you share any upcoming features or developments that in Cherre that users can look forward to, but particularly those involving emerging technologies or advancements in that way?
Yeah, so I think about this in 2 realms, right? Is it more client-facing insight, or is it more back-end focus? Is it helping us do things cheaper, faster, more efficiently? I'll start with the latter, which is stuff that people don't really see, but it's actually really exciting. Because the faster I can get data in, the better it is for our clients. The more accurate that data is, the better it is for our clients. The higher the match rate, the more useful the information is. The more I can find out anomalies, the more I can flag that and say something looks weird here, be alert. And there we're doing a lot of work on fuzzy matching between things that are not kind of clear to each other. And we're getting a lot of lift there based on our existing processes. Again, different places, different value. And the second place is, on our front end, or things that are client facing, we're trying to provide insight. So we're spending a lot of time on, again, back to that discussion around personas, making sure that they can live in this environment with the tools that they need to do their day-to-day. What we'd like to be able to do, and this is what we're spending a lot of time on, is can I give you the ability to do some of these things with a very, very clear understanding of what's in range and what's not in range. So maybe I can say something like, this input into your model doesn't make sense. It's a 3 sigma event. Did you mean that? And you might say, yeah, it's a public-private partnership. And I'd say, fine. I don't know more than you. And that's not the kind of thing that we tell our clients. But I'm telling you this is out of range, so you better have a good reason why it's out of range. And then maybe this is quite in the range, and I can say, I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's in the range somewhere in the middle. And over time, we're pushing those boundaries, slim to be slimmer and slimmer, to the point where I can say, hey, this is the box of what's most likely to happen to you based on all of your existing information, past decisions, all of your assumptions, all the data you have at your disposal. And 2 clients will have very, very different answers, which is good. That means that they can still compete. It means we have humans, we still have a job to do.
Exactly.
So providing ways to move data into the world in a better way and faster way, and then be able to turn that into insights a lot faster and giving our clients the freedom and power to be able to do whatever they want to do with the data.
Phenomenal. Thank you. All right, let me ask you three final sign-off questions, kind of rapid fire. And the idea of this is here's the first question. It's a kind of high level. Why should real estate professionals be paying attention to AI today?
It's a good question. Maybe they don't. I think I don't know the answer to that. I think it's important to understand the fundamental shift that's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. And it's not super hard to see what the trajectory could look like. All we have to do is see how financial services have evolved over the last 10 years or even 20 years from a very manual process, heavy intermediary process, into a point where there are almost no intermediaries in financial services. Things are traded homogeneously on exchanges in real time. Actually, high frequency trading is very, very fractions of seconds. So we're going to go through that process in real estate on its own. And the ability to automate a lot of the processes that intermediaries are doing is a lot easier today with some of the tools that are out there. And the ability of the investors to use their internal data to make better decisions compared to their peers who don't is meaningful, right? We're talking about early innings, and in early innings, first movers have a massive advantage. I can also tell you that if we look back in financial services as a proxy, not only are the first movers the ones that exist today, the biggest firms, right? The AQRs and the Millenniums of the world, right? And you pick a large fund. Those are the ones that were created around the same time. It's all the other ones that were kings of capital then are gone. So not only does there a first mover advantage, if you're the last mover, you're going to die. There's no question here. So I don't know that I can tell them which tools to necessarily have to use right now. But I can tell you that if they're not paying attention, if they're not trying to figure out what is the world going to look like in the next 5 years, you're already behind the curve and you should be very scared.
Awesome. Next question. Now, you did just preemptively tell me that you're not going to answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. For mortals, actually, no, this actually directly at you. How do you use AI daily? What tools and apps? What do you like to use?
I use GPT Omni a lot. I mostly use it. On Monday mornings, I give a talk to the entire company on a subject that they choose every week. And it used to take me somewhere between 8 to 10 hours to prepare that presentation every week. And I'm able to do that in roughly 2 to 3 hours today. So meaningful savings of time by, hey, I think this, I'll say something like, here's a presentation. I want to show a graph that shows the correlation X and Y that's going up. It'll tell me, hey, that's not true. I'm like, okay, so that doesn't work. Or here's 3 different versions of that, that just meet what you're trying to sell. So I can very, very quickly research a lot of topics and try and summarize information or go retrieve information that I think is true, but I haven't actually been able to show it with data. I want data to be able to tell that story. So I use that a lot. I use other tools around that that are similar to that context. Claude is a pretty interesting tool. Again, similar type idea. What I like about Claude is I can go back and forth and I can say, it feels like it's not there, but it feels like a more natural conversation of, hey, I have this idea about something for a talk. How do you feel about that? Well, here's some of the thoughts I was going to do with it. Why does that feel? Well, that seems like a little weak argument. This one seems a little stronger. Well, suggest more ideas in the story. So it feels a little more kind of the interactive, especially as you train it to do training by talking to it. This is what I think, right? So I use those tools a lot. I don't really use the more graphic tools. I don't really need to create images or sound or video in our universe. I know the folks on the marketing team use those types of tools to be able to answer things like content generation, quick iteration on different A/B testing, but I don't really spend a lot of time that personally. So probably more on the conversational kind of bots that allow me to answer or allow me to create content on my own faster and a little more accurate.
You mentioned GPT Omni. What is GPT Omni? I think of Chat GPT 4.0. What is
well, 4.0 is Omni, so the O is
it is Omni. Okay.
Yeah. So so the evolution of kind of the GPT models after GPT 4 came out, then 4.5. One of the discussions was what comes next, and it wasn't a 5, it was Omni, right? So basically, when you ask that LLM something, it may pull other models into the equation to be able to answer that question. Maybe I'll pull an image model, maybe I'll pull another one. So Omni is for omni-channel, right? So I can interact with this in many ways. I like that a lot because I think it's a lot more similar to what interactions with compute environments are going to look like in the future. So we're not going to be typing, we're not going to be moving a mouse around. It may be the minority report moving. I think it's more likely conversational with some kind of input that's different. And I think Omni gives us a good sense of what can be, because what could be in the future. It understands vision, it can interpret things it sees and translate that to objects it understands that it's trained on. It understands voice and can translate that into meaning. Obviously understands text. And there are a lot of other things that it'll understand over time. It smell is going to be a really easy one very soon. I know it sounds like silly.
No way.
Very,
Seriously?
very important. Yeah, there's huge companies out there just focused on smell, like Fruit of Room and some of those. They're
Oh my goodness.
powerhouses of fragrances, right?
That's amazing. All right. So the O in ChatGPT 4.0 is Omni.
Correct.
So I'm going to start using your term there, GPT Omni, and it kind of demonstrates this, sense of deep like advanced knowledge. I'll share with you a quick anecdote before I ask you this last thing. When I worked for Universal Studios, one of the guys I worked for was a fellow called Tom McGrath. He was John Dulgen's chief strategy guy at Paramount Studios. And what Tom used to like to say was, he said, yeah, you can really, really impress people if you learn just a handful of words of jargon from their industry and casually drop them into a sentence. He said they'll think you're a genius. So I'm just going to casually say GPT Omni now because nobody else does, at least not in my world. They'll all think I know a lot more than I really do. All right, last question. All right, so the whole one of the primary thrusts of this season is to deliver easy wins to viewers and to listeners, like something that as soon as they stop listening to this episode, they can pick up their phone or open up something on their computer and they can get an easy win using AI. Something that's just, wow, I didn't know it could do. Look how cool that is. Can you think of some like an easy win that somebody could do immediately after listening today?
I don't know about super easy, but definitely doable. So building models for assets is something that we spend a lot of time in Excel. We usually twist the models to make it do whatever we want for that IC memo, and 99% of the time, we're wrong. But we can today, everyone can drop in an assumptions table or say, point an Omni model to certain things. Like, here's all the information, here's the market information from RCA, Reese, TREP. Here's the information about it. So I can just drop in files literally and say, this is the data I have. And then I'm building a multifamily model. This is my standard model. Drop it in. And I want you to populate all of the inputs. And if there's more than one input that can conflict, I want you to highlight it and tell me if there's a conflict. So I have to choose between the one that I trust more. That's instant. And you're still going to have to do some stuff with the model after. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give you, 80, 90% of the way there. And once I'm done and I kind of fix it and get it 100% for my own stuff, now I can ask things like, I want you to create a sensitivity table for every one of these metrics. And don't just give me that box with, the dark blue in the middle, which doesn't really mean anything because I don't really know the variance there, right? It could be a normal distribution, which makes sense, but it's rarely a normal distribution, right? Interest rates are not a normal distribution. So when I put 5% in the middle and these squares around, I'm really misleading, right? And that's really bad analysis. I want to say, well, it's very likely to be somewhere between, 2 to 6, and it's really unlikely for it to be 35, right? So I want to be able to do that type of analysis, and that's all doable right now today.
See, I love hearing these ideas because it makes me just want to immediately go and play with it a little bit.
Let me know how it goes.
I will.
How much you like it.
All right, LD Salmanson. Now I'm going to quote the title that is on your LinkedIn profile over here: Maverick Herder at Cherre. I'm not entirely sure what that is. That's not a chief of anything really, but I think you are the founder, aren't you, of Cherre?
Yeah, I'm one of the founders, yeah.
One of the founders of Cherre. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
All right, that was LD Salmanson at Cherre. What a fascinating fellow. Really enjoyed talking to you. Again, LD, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you, dear viewers, also for joining us. Another fascinating and uber educational episode today. Every single time I come out of these calls, I definitely feel like I've learned something. So I certainly hope that you do too. If you would like to fill some of the gaps and get some small wins, some easy wins on a more regular basis delivered to your inbox, so it's not just the podcast or YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at easywin.ai, and I'll be sending you regular updates and some really easy things to do that will dramatically increase, or actually incrementally increase, your knowledge, awareness, and appreciation of the power of AI and how it is changing the real estate industry every single day. All right, that's it for this episode. Thank you for joining me. And until next time, it's Adam Gower signing off.